Welcome to Searching Smarter with Selby Jennings, the podcast for hiring managers and professionals navigating the job market within financial sciences and services. Whether you're searching for top talent to grow your team or considering your own career move, this podcast will help you do so with confidence. I'm your host, Jesse Scaff, Global Client Director for Phaidon International's Financial Sciences and Services brand, Selby Jennings. For our first episode, we wanted to talk about one of the most relevant topics in not only financial services and the talent industry, but the workplace as a whole. The topic you can't seem to escape, and that seems to be a part of every conversation: AI. I'm joined by two experts on the topic, including Phaidon International's own Mike Chapman, Managing Director of Technology, who is overseeing our digital transformation here at Phaidon while helping us incorporate AI into our recruiting operation, and Jonathan Kestenbaum, Managing Director from Alexander Mann Solutions, a lawyer by education and entrepreneur who spent his entire career in HR technology. Today we'll be talking about AI in the workplace, specifically the talent industry.
Broadly speaking, I think the future is going to be a combination of tech and touch.
Candidate experience to ensure you're giving yourself the best chance to get hired in a world of mass submissions. In this day and age, it's easy for a single candidate to submit 1,000 different resumes or 1,000 applications in a minute or less. Retaining the human element in recruiting.
We're busy building candidate co-pilot and a manager co-pilot. They can query where they are in the process. They can get a response within 24, 48 hours to their application.
Debating the topic of whether or not it's cheating to use AI in an interview if you're going to be using it in your job. Regulations around AI and its ethical practices.
AI is not a get out of jail free card. You have to look at AI like it's a human.
And whether or not AI is underhyped or overhyped. So let's get started. So thank you both for being here. Thanks for taking some time to discuss what AI looks like in the workplace, specifically the talent industry. And the first question I want to ask the two of you, maybe John, if you want to answer first, how's AI being used in the workplace, specifically within the talent industry?
There's lots of use cases. There's the obvious use cases of just making broader business more efficient, like, using GPT to generate emails. But specific use cases that we're looking at that relate to talent acquisition would be things like creating targeted job descriptions. We're looking at creating online advertisements. We're looking at writing candidate outreach emails, summarizing and transcribing interviews, and then actually conducting an interview. And in each of those use cases, we're exploring both text-based AI generation, image-based AI generation, and video and voice-based AI generation.
Mike, anything to add on that specific topic?
We've picked up a number of those themes as well. Lots of Gen AI now embedded in our system, our CRM. One of the nice ones, which is being used quite a lot, is the shortlist AI, where it can pull out the relevant skills from a CV and start to construct the email to the hiring manager, and actually also points out the weak points and areas they might not like to explore. So it feels a very human email. And ultimately, we've now re-indexed our whole database and applying an AI search across it, and that's about to go live. And within that search, a person with much less competency in constructing searches can actually develop very complex searches much more easily, because they don't need to know all the synonyms for a job title or a skill anymore. The AI suggests all the other things which may be relevant to search for, and we can combine search references much more easily. So that will be launched in the business in the next few weeks, and that's a hugely powerful tool to find those little nuggets in the database which may not have come up under a standard search. And then ultimately we're moving towards we have a proof of concept, which we call JEDI here, which is an end-to-end process, everything from a phone call being transcribed, as Jonathan referred to constructing the requirement in the system directly from that phone call, searching the database and contacting candidates with relevant questions for them to come back and opt into the job, fill in an application, be ranked, and actually forward to the manager without any human intervention. Now, that's not what we're going to deploy, but we will deploy phases of that, because we want the human intervention at certain points and oversight as per the regulation. And then there are many other areas in the business where we're trying to buy AI off the shelf, so to speak, whether our compliance department, our bids area, and those are more tools off the shelf. But what we have found is that really complex AI is they're big boys' toys. Would you not agree, Jonathan? I haven't met many people who have actually gone off and developed their own, obviously an LLM, probably out of the question for most people, but even complex other AI solutions around neural networks to solve problems. We tend to buy them off the shelf for recruiters at our size at the moment.
Agree completely. And I agree that we're also moving in the direction of agents, autonomous agents, rather than just exploring these individual use cases. But to your point, it's doing that kind of compliantly, responsibly, ethically. So it's just going to take some time to get there.
Yeah, it feels like baby steps at the moment. It's mostly the Gen I and cutting out some of the administrative work. And then it's always a combination of AI and automation, which really gets you the result rather than just AI.
And how do you think that, how do both of you think that's going to affect the human element in recruiting? Mike, you made reference to it. There are, programs and there's an end-to-end process that can avoid or leave out human intervention. John, you made reference to the fact that we can write job descriptions or even potentially use imaging for certain parts of recruiting. What does that mean for the vetting of CVs, the filtering of applications, or even the what traditionally we would consider the initial recruiter screen for an internal recruiter? What kind of impact do you think that will have on the human element of recruiting?
Broadly speaking, I think the future is going to be a combination of tech and touch. Gen AI has made AI like more in your face, but AI has been around. And so I've been repeating this line for probably the last 8 years, which is tech is going to be doing what it does best, which is compute, and humans are going to be doing what we do best, which is engage, right? And broadly speaking, when you think about what this does for the humans in the process, with the idea that humans will be kept in the loop, I believe that one, we're going to be able to increase some of the metrics we already track, like time to hire, quality of hire. But I think we're going to be able to focus on things that we might not have been able to focus on before. Hiring manager satisfaction. Like we've been scared to measure that metric because we don't have enough time to build that relationship meaningfully. Like, quality of hire is likely one that we'll be able to spend more time optimizing for. So I believe that recruiters will have more time to focus on the things that they like to do and they're good at. I think that much of the administrative burden will be done by technology, and ultimately the recruitment function will be better for it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. One of the interesting things, we're agents here, so we're into productivity gains, and all that automation taken out, the heavy lifting of writing emails and conducting searches manually will be taken out. But we're also working away on this. This is definitely a big boy's toy. And I did have a quote from an external consultancy for this one, Jonathan. And it went to 7 figures very quickly to devise a next best action for the recruiter. So it looks at all the past history of the placements which have been made and what action was taken at which point for the best result. Like, which manager do you phone at 4:30? Which one do you phone at 9:30? Which one do you phone at lunchtime? How often do you follow up? Do you follow up after 36 hours or 72? Which CVs should you send? And here's the suggested CVs. So we spend a lot of time in unproductive work as recruiters, and we'd love to drive that unproductive percentage down and the reflective up by giving them the machine learned best action to do next from all the data we have from the last 30,000 placements. How do we get to a deal quicker? Which deal should you be working on with which client is probably going to hire? Because we know at JP Morgan, when you send 5 CVs and you follow up after 72 hours, then you get a result. That is something we're going to play with, and hopefully the recruiters then go, wow, well, now I have to do exactly what and I have higher quality interaction. I get more results more often, and our job becomes more satisfying, and we spend less time doing the wrong things and more time doing the right. So that'll be a real head scratcher to get that right. And we'll start with a fairly simple proof of concept, I think, and then hopefully not spend the 7 figures to get it done in the organization.
But I think it's really interesting a point you make. Like the difference between our best recruiters and our worst recruiters is best. And like no matter how much structure we build around the way they should be doing their work, like they don't always listen. And so I think that this is going to allow us to kind of shrink that gap and hopefully get people more towards the productive recruiter and learn from what the most productive recruiter is able to do. So, I agree. Like it's going to move. It's going to make us more efficient for sure.
And that's exactly what I'm talking. Take a 5-year recruiter and make a 5-month recruiter as productive as a 5-year recruiter. Wouldn't that be great? So maybe you want to go halves on the fee with me, Jonathan.
Yeah.
One way that I see it, especially coming, I know we've mentioned we're all agents here. So, coming from an agency, one way that I see the efficiency becoming quicker is in our candidate write-ups, right? Once we've spoken to a candidate or once the Gen AI has reviewed the resume, allowing our summaries of candidates before we submit to a client to be much more executive and actual summarized rather than just repeating what might be on the resume or something like that. And I think that's an immediate efficiency that closes that gap that you're talking about, Jonathan, of who's junior or who's not a top performer and who is a top performer. Something as simple as reevaluating or rewriting a candidate summary that we can then send off in a quarter of the time as well is one of those gaps.
Yeah, and I've seen some interesting tech there. There's tools like AllSorter that reformat the resume and can pull out personal identifiable information and like use Gen AI to optimize what the resume says, write the summary, so you can
read between the lines.
Yeah, so you could send that at scale to the hiring manager without having to have a whole team that reformats resumes, and it saves a significant amount of money. There's also tools that can read between the difference between what a job description said and what a resume said, and then create interview questions to dynamically ask that candidate questions that will, again, further unpack the candidate's capabilities. And I think like the kind of most interesting side of that also, which is the opposite, is and it's almost like the elephant in the room, is the candidates have access to these AI tools too.
That was going to be my point, Jonathan. So you got all these skills, but their CVs are all more perfect now. So the interview questions become really important, don't they? That you need to ask this question.
Absolutely.
This is like a big question, and I think like I have my opinion on it. I'd love to hear yours, Mike. Like, is it cheating for the candidate to use AI? Like in that recruitment process?
But what about if they're using AI in their job to do their job most efficiently? Is there a balance? Is it legal? Is it frowned upon?
I think it's to be expected. Here's my CV. Here's the job.
To be.
Make my CV match this job. If they start inventing skills, that is your job as a recruiter and as a hiring manager to find out the fact that they've invented the skills. But it will become ever more difficult to pick the top candidate because all their CVs will read correctly.
Yeah, but even so, like I've seen systems that while you ask interview questions, it's listening. The candidate has the answers being populated by Gen AI tool in front of them.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. And they're answering the question.
Yeah.
And so like even so you go further, like, and that feels more like cheating, right? But like when cheating. I think about it, it's like we're obviously assessing candidates wrong if they're able to cheat like that. And so to me, it's like if they're going to have this technology and they're not going to need to worry about answering a question like this because they have something and give them the answer when they're in the company, then to me, maybe we should be assessing them for softer skills, ability to agility, like things that will make them a more effective resource in the long run.
Yeah. Look, you make some really, really good points. There is, of course, software out there which will check whether it's an AI written CV as well.
Yes.
And so what? All right, so you can use these checkers.
AI checking
20% chance it was AI, but then you can put it through another system, which then takes it and puts it back into human language, so it gets below 10% as an AI, even though it was all AI written and then rewritten by AI. So it's definitely a challenge, and obviously the AI is helping with that transition to skills and not competencies. And a much larger skills taxonomy that we're having to work around 200, 300, 400, 500 skills in an organization and being able to strip a CV for skills rather than just big, bold competencies written in there and work history. There'll be some twists and turns in this story, without a doubt, of how we end up having to assess candidates with all these tools available to them and to the end users. Many of the tools which are the end users are now having to review the neural network type. I'm not going to name some of these corporate tools, Jonathan, which we're both aware of, but they're using tools which aren't explainable and aren't repeatable and immediately put them in deep water with various regulations.
Where I see all of this becoming relevant for us specifically as an agency, we obviously do so much work with STEM candidates, right? We're placing technologists and engineers and quants and quant traders and quantitative risk candidates who are using AI, machine learning, and generative AI in their day-to-day jobs. And part of their interview process and their education assessment is to be evaluated on their abilities in these fields. To take that away from them in an interview process is almost like asking them to conduct an interview with one hand behind their back to an extent, right? So to Jonathan's point, maybe we are meant to be evaluating them on their communication and presentation skills or how quickly they can think on their feet without needing to rely on the technology for every single thing, something like that.
Yeah, well, if you answer the question, how you answer the question isn't a problem, is it? In a way, if you've answered it, and what tools you use. So we'll see where employers end up on that. But as recruiters, it's getting harder to assess sometimes, without a doubt, Jonathan, without the final, technical skills of the manager that the manager should have in that interview environment. But it's an interesting challenge.
Sure is. I want to quickly pivot, just in case you both have thoughts on really how the internal recruiters themselves, not us as the agency, but how the internal recruiters themselves are either dealing with the AI submission process or perhaps the interview and resume vetting process. What I've read from various articles, whether it's eFinancial or Business Insider, that now in this day and age, it's easy for a single candidate to submit 1,000 different resumes or 1,000 applications in a minute or less to jobs that AI might have found relevant for them. And if every candidate is doing that, now the internal recruiter is dealing with exponential amounts of resumes than they were previously. If we're keeping the human element of recruiting involved, right, who these individuals are trained to be as internal recruiters is to do a little bit of reading between the lines or try and find some soft skills in a resume to vet out and find the right candidate to push forward. But if their volumes are in the thousands or even hundreds of thousands, as I've read for some individuals over the course of weeks or months or what have you, how do internal recruiters go about that? How do we eliminate the noise but keep the human element of recruiting?
The challenge has existed prior to Gen AI sending resumes on behalf of candidates to matching jobs at scale. I mean, think about companies like Disney and Nike. Like, everyone wants to work, or a sports team or a sports league. Like, everyone wants to work for these organizations, and they're outside of Disney and Nike, like sports teams in particular, relatively small organizations. And the problem they have is they have so many applicants, and when they turn down somebody, they lose them as like a fan, and they don't want to do that, right? So there's been a whole bunch of work done there on leveraging matching technologies and coming up with creative ways to not make a black hole process for the candidate. I think we're going to need to leverage new types of assessments for sure. Applying is not going to be like the binary step to maybe an interview. You're going to have to go through a few more hurdles based on the fact that we're going to have more applications. And by the way, this is happening. We're seeing more applications across the board at all of our clients. It's happening more for us in early career, mostly because those folks are most educated on how to leverage these tools to apply. It's becoming a conflict for even no-name brands, like a bank in the middle of nowhere that struggled to attract candidates previously. So in some ways it helps them because now they're getting access to candidates that they might not have gotten before. But yeah, no, it's an interesting issue.
So yeah, that whole candidate piece that you say, Microsoft are pushing their co-pilots, obviously, and it's a bit of a catch-all phrase, the co-pilots, but we're busy building candidate co-pilot and a manager co-pilot. It's more than just they can query where they are in the process. They can get a response within 24, 48 hours to their application, and it may even say where they matched up and where they scored. So we can try and make it as an open, an informed process as possible for a candidate, and they can search for new jobs in that co-pilot, another job. So, as Jonathan refers to, keeping a candidate happy through a process and a rejection process is really important. So the co-pilots which we're writing will be, really functionally rich and engaging to the candidate. It doesn't feel like you wait 3 weeks and then just get rejected with a blanket, what is seen as a blanket email. But if you have a nicely worded AI or one which says the reason they were rejected, that's what they want to know most of the time when they're rejected. If they can feel like they've been valued and assessed correctly and a reason for rejection given, they can go away from that and maybe even gives them pointers of how they could do better in the future. That's a completely different process to waiting 3 weeks, not finding anything, making 10 calls and 5 emails to try and get a response, which is what happens so much of the time. And that can all be put right with some co-pilot AI type stuff.
And that seems to be part of the issue in itself is just getting a response. Feedback is great. And even a rejection may be viewed as a win, but so many candidates, especially with this mass recruiting and mass submission environment, aren't even hearing back. And it's creating a negative candidate experience, and it sometimes can affect the brand reputation, as you say, John.
Yeah, without a doubt. So we're working really hard on that here just to get recruiters to close jobs down, which automates the response. And so we've got a long way to go to get a full co-pilot in there and get the rejections right. But end users, as Jonathan refers to, they've had to deal with this for many years and not upset people as a consumer brand. Very definitely high profile issue.
Yeah, and I believe that the best way to still get a job is quote unquote through your network, right? But like your network could be with somebody who works at a end organization, but it could also be with an agency, a recruiter at an agency who you build a relationship with. And so, and I think as agencies, we're going to have more time to build relationships, not just with the hiring managers, but actually with the candidates, the candidates as well. And the technology you're mentioning, which will allow us to kind of more scalably stay connected to more high quality candidates. This is kind of where things are headed. Like we're going to, in many ways be like agents for these, really high profile candidates.
That's a great point, and something which I hadn't referred to, Jonathan, but it plays exactly to that. So we're hopefully in about 6 or 8 weeks' time. My whole organisation will hold me accountable for this now. But from our vendor, our CRM vendor, who we're working with, and we do a lot of the testing for, and it's a good partnership. We're bringing something which is we're referring to as spec AI. And so as recruiters, when we get a really good candidate, we look to spec them out to clients. So here's a top candidate. So what we're looking to do, as you quite rightly mentioned, is own their network for them and really be their agent and go. And what that tool is going to allow us to do is go back through the work history and say, look, 8 years ago, you worked at Deloitte and it looked like these people worked with you here, Jill and Jeff and Janet. And actually, they're now very senior at PwC. Would you like us to spec you into Janet and say, you used to work with Bill back in, and they're now looking for their next step? Would you be interested in engaging with them? And we can choose whether to email them with them actually exposed as an individual, or phone call, or just blind the CV up and say, this might be someone you worked with before. And so we can sort of own their network for them and represent them back to their network of maybe 50, 60 people in one call. We can go through everybody they've worked with in their history through our new database structures we have. And that's hugely powerful. And you look as a recruiter very informed that you can say, you worked with Bill. And they go, yeah, I did work with Bill. Great. Yeah. Oh, he loved me. Put me into him. Or no, don't send me there at all. We didn't get on type thing. So yeah, you make a very good point that jobs are still through networks and people who know people. And we can go back through our database and now make this massive cross-reference of where everybody's been connected with everybody else.
I love that. It's funny.
That's very exciting.
I was giving a buddy of mine advice on applying for a job, and I said just that. Where'd you work the last four jobs? Let's go back and see where those people landed, because they're going to think positively of you.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, we'll prototype that in the next 6 to 8 weeks. It'll be in our sandbox, hopefully this week, and we can start testing. And it's really cool. It's a bit space age the way it builds, because it puts the person and then says, right, they were here and there's all the people around them there. They were here and there's all the people around them there.
A huge web.
Yeah, if we can get it right, it'll be good for agencies like us when we're trying to own the person and get the top candidates placed out.
I mean, that's a perfect example of agencies making individuals look smarter. Right.
Totally.
I mean, we obviously aren't going to know the however many number of people that show up in this network diagram for them. But, to show that to us and have that hand delivered to us is going to make us, that's, to me, a definition of working smarter, not harder.
Yeah, it comes back to your point, John. The people don't have time to talk to people about people, because the information will be there to do it. We're not going to have to, plow through too much admin to get to that point of a conversation with someone again, which is what we want.
Yes. I want to change lanes a little bit here. This one, Jonathan, this I know is something that is near and dear to your heart, something you are resident expert in as well, and that is the regulation behind AI, using it. I know AMS has a product that you use as well, and the regulation and just auditing of organizations that use it, how to use it, as we all talked about earlier, ethically. If you could just speak on that a little bit for both candidates and hiring managers and clients to be aware of.
Yeah, so obviously it's exciting to talk about the use cases, but there's a series of laws and frameworks that have been launched to help organizations leverage AI responsibly, compliantly, ethically. So broadly speaking, and let's just focus on the US for a second, the idea here is not like we're creating new rules necessarily. The idea here is AI is not a get out of jail free card, right? This is not your yacht in the Cayman Islands that you can not pay taxes on. You have to look at AI like it's a human. And AI cannot be biased. It cannot violate federal civil rights laws. And all the laws are really doing, and there are variations, are basically saying, we want to make sure you're not violating federal civil rights laws in the US. So in order to do that, we need you to run an audit every year on your technology. We need you to make sure it's not biased. We need you to make sure that you disclose to candidates that you're leveraging AI if you are, and you give them an alternative path if you're not. There's a few kind of elephants in the room. One is people generally think about the binary nature of, is this technology creating a disparate impact on my process, right? And that's what they think about when they think about compliance. Like, oh, is this technology creating an issue, creating bias? That's almost an easier problem to solve. And that's only like 10% of the challenge here, because there's tests to determine if a technology, and they're mathematical tests that you could use to determine if a technology is being used, is creating a disparate impact. But more importantly, it's how you use this technology in your process. So for example, if I use Seekout, a social search tool, to create a list of candidates that are diverse, and then I rely upon that information ultimately to make a hire, I've now violated federal civil rights laws in the US because of the way I used the tool in my process, not because that tool created a disparate impact, because I didn't create diverse, a white male can sue my organization for violating their federal civil rights laws. And that's harder to govern how you use AI in a process, because, you now need to train all your recruiters in how to use this technology and make sure that they're using it compliantly. And that's the part of this that's missing. We have to now create all this training that doesn't exist on how to use AI. We have to know when we're using AI, when it's a high risk use of AI. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is right now, the other like elephant in the room is right now, ultimately, the companies that use the AI are liable. And enforcement's kind of an issue in the US because candidates have to kind of say, my federal civil rights laws were violated. And the challenge is like most candidates don't even know these laws exist. So why would they ever bring it up? And if someone hasn't done an audit or disclosed AI, they still might be using it. You don't know they're using AI. So how do you know to go after them? Because it's like self, fulfilling here. So some of the new laws are starting to make the technology vendors also be compliant, which means that maybe it'll start to self-enforce a bit more because the vendors will have to disclose where it's being used. Then the companies will have to disclose that they're using it, and you'll start to see it be more enforceable. But I would argue that only 30% of our client base have policies in place to use AI today, which is crazy. And then of the 30%, a small fraction are using AI. And that's partially due to the legal complexities of leveraging it, but also due to technical complexity. And then I do want to pass over to you, Mike, but like, for example, we wanted to get Copilot and put into our organization. In order to do that, we had to go we had to run a whole exercise to lock up certain documents behind restrictions, because if we didn't do that exercise, any random employee would have been able to ask, what's John's salary? And because it was in some document somewhere that was shared, they would be able to find it, And so there's a whole bunch of like just prep work you have to do just to get these things in place. So anyway, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, and the regulation piece, we're not off the hook in the EU now. The EU AI Act, which actually ranks industries by risk statuses, and recruitment's immediately been put in a high risk status, which puts certain obligations on anybody in operating in those sectors. We've got a very similar to what Jonathan was saying. We've got to register the AI, self-register it, monitor it, audit it for bias, and have proper human oversight and regular audit that it's not producing biased results. And let's face it, the first AI tools which were rolled out by Amazon, Microsoft, Google, all had biased results from their recruiting sets that they put in, from the data sets they modeled everything on. It just carried on putting through whatever biases had been with previously. Of course, right. And so people have been burnt very early with these tools, and we really shouldn't make those mistakes again. So people are a little bit more focused on data sets, and also, as I say, explainable and repeatable processes need to be clear that they're being used and how they're working. And sometimes it's hard to say how they're working. And
listen, humans are biased. I'm not here to say that I think this is going to be worse than humans. I think it could be better. I mean, you can hide from a computer pieces of data, so it doesn't even know where someone went to school, where they grew up. It's harder to hide that from humans. But if they're not given that information to make a decision off of, then it can't be biased based off of that information.
Absolutely. You'd think that was obvious, wouldn't you, Jonathan? But somehow all three big ones made the mistake of giving them some personal information which they thought was important to the hiring decision, which obviously it's not.
There's a balance. There's a balance of information. Is there too much information to share that would create a bias? Is there not enough information that you're not sharing that's creating a bias? There almost has to be a perfect medium to create the unbiased.
We've got about a year to get our house in order here in Europe to comply with the European Act and start registering and monitoring and oversight, which we're doing here at Phaidon straight away. But yeah, it's going to keep coming at us. Regulation in this And there's going to be a few people fall foul of it. I've even heard of some of your clients actually taking their big systems out while they do a review. Jonathan, is that true?
Yeah, there was a couple of our clients that just didn't feel comfortable with the answers they were getting from the vendors that were supporting them. It's disappointing because those vendors are capable of having these, serious conversations. I guess weren't prepared. But you'll see more of that happening as this evolves.
We'll just wrap up with the last question here for the both of you. Give you a chance to put your stamp on what the future of AI and generative AI in the talent industry or workplace looks like. What's something that's obvious or evident to both of you that maybe companies or hiring managers or candidates might not know or should know as it pertains to AI in the workplace, generative AI? And I know we might have just addressed that, with the auditing and how to do it ethically if we're thinking about the client side of things. But what's something that candidates or hiring managers might want to know or should know?
I think we touched on it in the CVs can be AI generated, obviously. And I think there's a little bit of a generational gap here on certain occasions. Some Gen X managers maybe hiring millennials and Gen Zs and not realize how much manipulation might have carried on and their expectations of the process. So we can run into those sort of issues maybe. What do they need to know? I don't know, Jonathan.
I'm going to take a little bit of a different kind of spin on the question, which is, we've all been through the blockchain hype. We've been through all kinds of hype over the years, from SaaS-based servers to mobile friendly, the impact that these things had on, how we viewed the efficiencies that we would gain from these different technologies. I personally believe that AI is underhyped, right? I know that NVIDIA is through the roof and the public markets are crazy. Like, I actually personally believe this is one of those times where we are underhyping the capabilities and the disruption that this is going to cause in our organizations. And so if I talk about candidates and hiring managers and what they should be thinking about outside of the things we've already discussed, like, this is real. You need to, as a candidate, understand how you can leverage AI. Like, Mike took this class at Oxford on AI. Like, we all got to be doing stuff like that, become prompt engineers, and hiring managers. If you're not using it, like I said, 30% of our clients have a policy. Like, the other 70%, like, I hope they're still in business if they don't start using AI. Like,
the way we all learned to use computers or the original Microsoft programs and then our iPhones, like that's what you're saying, the next generation of what we're going to learn.
You're absolutely right, John, to say the hype cycle, and it has that name, and it was on the Oxford course. Funny you should mention it. That most of these technologies are overhyped to start with. And we sort of saw that in the markets over the last couple of weeks. People were questioning, well, really, what are people going to do with this AI? But other than it writing you a few emails and summarizing them, what's it going to do type questions? Those people don't really know the full answer. So it's overhyped in the short term, but underhyped in the long term. So I'm completely agreeing with you, Jonathan, that this effect will come over 2, 3, 4, 5 years when we look back. Same as the internet when it came, overhyped to start with, but underhyped on the way it's changed all our lives over those 20 years. So that's the sort of high level thinking on it that we're all talking about it, but a lot of people saying, well, what's it really doing for me now? This is all a load of rubbish. It will come, and it will come big. You're absolutely right.
I'm seeing across many functions the ability for 30 to 40% efficiency gains. And it's happening fast, which is going to require us to retool our organizations.
This is an interesting point there, Jonathan. I'm struggling with a little bit of take up here. So we give them a tool for shortlist AI, vacancy AI. We put a button on there, 15% of people use it. And these are millennials, Gen Zs. So there's still a little bit of inertia about do it the old way. There's quite a few of them still access ChatGPT. We know about 30% of them still access that. I'd love to know what they're doing in there. I hope they're not putting any personal identifiable information as they've been told not to.
Summarizing write-ups, of course.
So we're thinking of shutting that down. But yeah, there's still a little bit of inertia and a little bit of resistance to change, even with younger people. So that'll get washed through, and we'll all be adopting as we do down the years.
Wonderful. Well, a lot of great topics, a lot of great points made today. Thank you again both for taking some time. I think it's a really important educational piece, as we just talked about, for everyone involved, and not just in the recruiting industry or the talent industry or people services even. This is ubiquitous, and not just in financial services either. So some really useful points. Hope everyone takes something away. And thank you again both for being here to talk about some AI and recruiting.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.
That's all for today's episode of Searching Smarter. If you found this conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Until next time, keep searching smarter.